Hi there, and welcome to the Everyday Millionaire Mindset Matters podcast. My name is Patrick Francie, and I am the host of the podcast. And generally, I am here with my amazing wife, Stephanie Hanlon, where we do this podcast, the Everyday Millionaire Mindset Matters. And together, we generally unpack various topics that are related to mindset. But today, she's not here because she's actually traveling and off to Spain, which leaves you with me all alone, which for regular listeners, is a bit of a stretch for me. But listen, I'm committed to getting better as a solo podcaster, so bear with me. Now, recently I was a guest on the Sovereign Man podcast with a good friend of mine, Nikki Ballou. But out of that conversation actually came the inspiration for this podcast, which for me is to embark on what I think could actually be a pretty cool and profound exploration, if you will, in the context of actually answering the question of how do you live a life of being true to yourself, and what it is some of the work that is actually necessary to unravel and to actually get to the truest depths of your identity. Or said differently, how do we really show up to be our truest self? So I'm going to invite you to listen in as I do my best to go solo on this Mindset Matters podcast. And is often the case, most often the case with Stephanie and I, when we're doing this together, I really want to set the intention to go on a bit of an introspective journey together with you. Now, before I get started, and as always, a bit of an encouraging ask or a quick reminder, if you will, that we just recently launched this Everyday Millionaire podcast channel. So if you're inclined, please like, subscribe, share, comment, and work with Stephanie and I to actually build a community of like-minded listeners and viewers who are committed to their journey of self-discovery and of being their greatest self and living their best lives. So join us, comment, let me know how we can improve. Let's get kicking off here. Now, the journey of self-discovery really does take on a lot of forms, doesn't it? From reading amazing authors who can support you in learning and gaining perspective to coaching perhaps, and different conversations mixed with always a healthy dose of introspection and reflection, because the commitment to defining who we really are is actually pretty intentional. It is actually very intentional, and it does take some work. There is those who have that fixed mindset that say, guess what? This is just who I am, and it is the way I am. Whereas those like you watching or listening to this particular podcast have a growth mindset. And you might be saying, okay, let me look closer at who I'm being, and then ask yourself the really important question, which is, am I being my most authentic self, or am I actually operating on some old belief system, or I'm just not willing to show up for who I really am because it feels too risky? And, a quick hint to the answer to that question is that, yes, you are, in fact, hiding out a little bit, because we all are. And then we have to add to that question is, am I living my core or true values, or am I living a set of values that actually don't even belong to me? It's my parents, it's my peers, it's, my grandparents. But the point is that the journey of self-discovery really is a lifelong commitment to being your greatest and most authentic self. In its essence, authenticity is a word we often hear, and we might even use it, but we don't necessarily take the time to fully grasp what we're saying. So let's take a look at what it means to be authentic so that we can actually be on the same page for this particular conversation. Let's look at the meaning of the word based on Google search. Now, by definition, authenticity is the state of being true to oneself by aligning our actions, our beliefs, and our values with our core identity. It's actually about stripping away the layers of societal expectation and that front-facing persona that we all have, and finding actually the courage to embrace who we truly are. And let's be clear, living authentically is not and can't be just a buzzword. It's actually a fundamental aspect of our well-being, of both our mental and emotional health. And I'm even going to ask you to consider that it could be part of your physical health. I believe, and I've actually got evidence in my world, that our emotional and mental health is directly connected to our physical health. And I won't go off on a rabbit hole, but we'll get to that later. We'll talk about that maybe another time. When we live authentically, we experience self acceptance, we experience fulfillment, significance, and we actually have genuine connection with other people. It actually lays the foundation for a purpose driven life. When Stephanie and I launched our shift program, for example, setting honest intentions for transformation, or our recent RAIN initiative of the entrepreneur's edge, these were at their very core the quest by our clients for self discovery, to be able to discover who they are and then to build their businesses, their careers, and ultimately their lives based on them being their most authentic self. Because here's the thing, in a world filled with external influences and societal pressures, it's just really easy to lose touch with our true selves. And that really is why the journey of self discovery becomes so essential. It's actually an opportunity to reconnect and, in many cases, actually define or even discover our authentic essence and then explore who we are at our very core. Here's the thing, self discovery begins with introspection. And like I said earlier, it actually takes a commitment, it takes intentional work. But by engaging in practices such as journaling, meditation, and even self reflection, which Stephanie and I have talked about extensively many times, we can actually foster that self awareness and uncover our truest desires, or at least start to tell the truth about them and then connect to our core values. Are we, in fact, connected to our core values? And, in these journeys, it's always about peeling back the layers and then uncovering and revealing the real depths of our identity. Now, the reason so few go on a journey of self discovery is defining and being your most authentic self also requires embracing vulnerability. And at some point, you have to explain or maybe even defend how you're showing up. And that is, of course, assuming that you go through these changes and then you actually take some actions and you have a different way of being or speaking. Now, on the Sovereign Man podcast I told you about earlier, the conversation morphed into a discussion about vulnerability and authenticity, which was actually born from some of the realities that have merged post pandemic. And given some of the challenges that men are facing today. Now, I think you'd likely agree business in 2023 has been pretty challenging for many. And it's not just business, it actually applies to family and relationships and perhaps even the confusion and the uncertainty that men face. And I want to qualify that, men and women. I was on the Sovereign Man podcast. That's why I refer to men. But in my conversation with Nikki, who was the show's host, I actually shared the need for what I believe is that men have to be prepared and actually have the courage to be more vulnerable with where they're at mentally, for example, and then to tell the truth about what is really going on for them. And that led to a discussion about the risks of men or women being authentic, which then led to getting into the clarifying context, if you will, which is that men and women, whether they're separate or together, actually need to create the environment and the space to get together with other like minded people and to engage and have levels of conversation that go deeper than just asking, how's the weather? Or how about that sports team, whichever one you happen to watch. Now, from my perspective, I'd say that right now, in what seems to be an increasingly divisive and polarized world, the toughest question to answer eventually gravitates to wondering if anyone can or even should risk being vulnerable, or should they be sharing their views or fears, their concerns, without risking being made wrong or ostracized, even perhaps even trolled on social media. Now, I'm going to say that the short answer to that is yes, they can risk it. But the longer answer is it's not as easy as we sometimes may think it is. Now, I'm going to give it a bit of an example. I got together, a friend phoned me, said, "Hey, Patrick, let's get together for a drink and a burger." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." So we got together, and as we were sitting there talking, he actually shared with me some of what he was feeling was a challenge. Now, he's been on a very clear personal growth journey, if you will. He's very accomplished in his career, two young teenage children, very successful in his business, an amazing wife. But he's been on this journey of self discovery, of really kind of committing to being the best he can be. And he is at so many levels. But as he's going through that and that self discovery, he's learning things and he's wanting to share with others. But as he's sharing with others, they're kind of looking at him like, are you part of a cult or something? Like what, like they don't really get it. So he can't open up to the conversation. Now, the point of me sharing the story is that you can risk being vulnerable, but you have to actually work to create the right environment. And I would say that it's one of the driving forces behind this particular Mindset Matters podcast and working to grow this YouTube channel, because it really is about attracting like minded individuals and getting into conversation, even if it is just comments in the show notes. So, one of the things is that authenticity requires really embracing vulnerability. And that's because it allows us to let go of the mask and, again, those front facing facades. So when we open up ourselves to that vulnerability, we actually are creating the space for further, more real and genuine or even meaningful connections with others, because like attracts like. And when we create that space, we actually go on the journey together and have that collective personal growth, if you will. But having said that, we have to walk before we run. And most importantly, we have to know that not everyone is on the journey of being their best selves and of living their greatest lives. As a matter of fact, most by far would argue for the stand they take, which is, this is just the way I am, rather than considering that the way we are is always a decision. We actually are choosing who we are being and how we are showing up. Now, let me share another story, a little bit of a personal anecdote with you. For many years in my life, some would consider me to be curt and abrupt. And okay, actually, some still do. But I really didn't understand what even any of that meant. And then one day at a particular event that I was speaking at, a one of the attendees, who happened to be actually somebody I knew, approached me as I was walking through the foyer of this big building. And he said, Patrick, I just have to share something with you. I've known you a while, and I just want to say that I don't know what it is, but you intimidate the shit out of me. And I went, wow. He says, yeah, you always got this serious look on your face, and I don't know what it is. So rather than take that as being critical, I took it as good feedback. And I considered it. And I went, something, I know that when I'm thinking a lot, when I'm walking and thinking, I've got this stern look on my face and I'm just really focused, and I'm probably not that pleasant or really appealing as somebody to approach. And what I did immediately is I gave it some thought. And then when I went back into the room, which was several hundred people that I knew that I would meet through the course of the weekend that I was speaking at, I took off my suit jacket. I actually loosened my tie and I rolled up my sleeves. And it was just the thought that I had, that how do I open up to people? And that changed the whole weekend. Just relaxing into that casualness rather than being in the dark suit and the tie and being all buttoned down changed the game. And it really changed how I showed up on stage for years afterwards. Now, the point is it was really profound in that the friend did just a great job of sharing how I was occurring for him, even though he knew me well. So I actually had to consider that input from him, and I just made some changes. Now, I was very conscious of it, and I just started thinking about just how I showed up in appearance, not just how I showed up in appearance, but also of how I was entering the conversation with people, and being clear that if I'm being present, not in my head, not being present to this conversation, I had to consider is, am I entering the conversation where I'm at or where they're at? And what I got to is staying present and entering the conversation where people I was talking to are at, not where I was at. Okay, now that may be a little bit confusing, but let's face it. The journey of self discovery is not without its challenges. There are fears, there are doubts, there's definitely resistance that's going to show up along the way. And as you start to step into being your truest self, you just may no longer align with the way of thinking of your friends, of your family, of your peers. And so we need to align with their values, but we may not anymore. That has gone, and you're really clear on who you are. And all of a sudden, you don't align with those values. And that may mean a change in the relationship, which then frightens people off and then begs the question, are you willing to be misunderstood in the context of your life, in the context of your self-discovery? And in all honesty, I got to say that many, perhaps even most, are not. Those are big decisions. And when we get to be who we really are, then all of a sudden the people that we were hanging out with before may not be the people that you want to continue hanging out with. That is both the blessing and the curse, by the way, of self-discovery, of being authentic. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that it's a great practice to shift from seeing only obstacles in this conversation and perhaps even the roadblocks that you feel you're going to hit, and look instead at, are these opportunities for your growth, and to actually practice the resilience and to test your commitment to being your best self. Because ultimately, in order for us to overcome the challenges, we have to get a place of self compassion. We have to actually embrace self compassion and have the patience with ourselves, because self discovery is a lifelong process. And it's important that we don't fall into the trap of beating ourselves up, and that we can actually embrace the journey we're on with a really open mind, and the confusion and the uncertainty that is actually going to come with it, because that way it will likely happen in a more profound way. And we have to know that you will be tested, we will be tested time and again. Now, as I said, living authentically is not easy, or even said another way, it's not the path of least resistance. And there are very few that are willing to take it. Many of what I refer to as shelf help books are being sold, and as well as the programs, and they're being purchased. But guess what? They actually remain on the shelf. Because here's the thing, we have to ask ourselves again, we're always asking ourselves questions. How do we integrate authenticity into our daily lives, knowing that we are risking judgment of others and perhaps even feeling exposed? And here's where I'd invite you to consider that you start by aligning your actions with your authentic self, in making conscious choices that reflect both your truest desires and your values. And you do so without making anyone else wrong, including yourself. And remember that self care also plays a huge role in living authentically, remembering that by nurturing your mental and emotional well being, you're actually creating the space for the authenticity to flourish. So I hope that these insights are actually leaving you feeling inspired to embark on your own journey of self-discovery, and that you're willing to embrace the real transformative power of authenticity. Just remember, it's never too late to reconnect with your truest self. And you can start by doing the inner work, exploring your passions, your values, and your beliefs, and embracing vulnerability as you step into the life you are meant to live. Now, the other thing is listen to our podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about the work Stephanie and I offer, you can go to the link in the description or the show notes, and you can learn a lot more. So make a commitment to stay true to yourself and watch as your mindset and your life expand in ways that, quite frankly, you could never have imagined. So thanks for joining me on this hopefully short and introspective journey. And until next time, stay authentic and keep uncovering the beauty within, and watch for us on the Everyday Millionaire Mindset Matters podcast right here every week. See you again.